Second up, we have a briefing on our Austin Police Department post-protest complaints. And I'm not certain exactly who's presenting this information. It looks like we have ACM Ariano here. And Ray, are you going to be presenting for us today?
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. For this afternoon's briefings, for the first one you have up, we will have Farah Muscadin, our Director of Office of Police Oversight, to make that presentation.
Good afternoon, members of the committee, Mayor Pro Tem. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Good afternoon, my name is Farah Muscadin. I'm the Director of the Office of Police Oversight. Happy to be here with you this afternoon to share our preliminary analysis of the summer protests from 2020. And I do want to start off by particularly saying the information that I'll be sharing with you is primarily from when the protests began on May 29th through the end of November of 2020. And so, as you know, many protests across the country began shortly after the murder of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. What's unique with Austin is that it was just a month earlier from that date. There were protests involving community concerns around the death of Michael Ramos that occurred on April 24th of 2020. So in the protests that occurred, they were primarily about police reform and social justice and police brutality. Next slide. So we're going to go over the protest complaints. We haven't talked about the protests in a while, but just an overview. This was clearly unprecedented for our city and definitely unprecedented for the Office of Police Oversight because shortly after May 29th, we received several contacts from community members, over 1,000 within that first month. Of those 1,000, and what I mean contacts are individuals that contacted the Office of Police Oversight via phone, email, or online complaint form. Through those contacts, we submitted 308 external complaints. And what that means is that we create what's called a notice of formal complaint, and that is sent to APD's Internal Affairs Division, which then, as we hope, would initiate an investigation. With working with the department of the 308, we identified 106 duplicates. So that left us with 202 external complaints that we requested be investigated. Of that 202 complaints, 27 were investigated. External complaints were investigated by Internal Affairs. The department initiated on its own 21 internal complaints. And as you can see, external complaints are complaints that come from the community. Internal complaints are complaints that are generated by the police department. Of the 21 that they generated, they investigated all 21. Next slide, please. Just want to go over with you the common themes that we saw in the protest complaints. Many of them were involving the use of force. For example, the OC spray, the use of the less lethals, allegations of protesters being pushed to the ground. We've talked about this before in the special sessions that council called last summer. the high-profile cases. We've received complaints about lack of de-escalation, the equipment and tactics that were used during the protests, and then complaints about interaction with media where officers allegedly pointed guns at members of the press. Next slide, please. So we submitted several objections throughout this whole process. On August 12th, we submitted a letter to then Chief Brian Manley. Given the enormity of the complaints that we received, we were starting to see some red flags. And we documented that and sent a letter, I believe it was August 12th of 2020, in terms of what we were seeing. And the reason why we did that is because we wanted to flag them early on and address them because, of course, we are limited by the 180-day rule, meaning that the investigation and any discipline or resolution has to occur by the 180th day. So we felt like it was our responsibility to flag our concerns that we saw pretty early on so that they could be addressed and would not be impacted by waiting later on in the course of the investigation or the course of the process. And so some of the objections that we made to the department included the category of they categorized the complaints. And so what that means is that the police department has an internal process for this categorization. A is the most severe, potentially leading to discipline of termination. And D is essentially saying that there's no policy violation. The vast majority, I would probably say close to 80–90% of the complaints that came in from community were classified as D or administratively closed. We had ongoing issues with cooperation between the department and our staff with review and access to information that OPO is required to see and have so that we can exercise our responsibility of providing oversight, particularly over the internal affairs investigation. We had difficulty with getting access to the investigatory materials. We generally use, as practice since probably about 2007, our internal case management system where all information regarding complaints are supposed to be entered into that system. Months later, we learned that the department had a separate system to use to track the protest cases and have information in there that we weren't really privy to. So that became an issue. And then we saw bias in the investigation and investigatory summaries. And this is key because because we are prohibited from conducting the investigation, our main responsibility and our role in monitoring is to ensure that the investigations were fair and thorough. So when we were reviewing the numbers of the investigations in the end of November, at that time there were 21 external investigations pending, and we objected to 20 of the 21. We also objected to the dispositions, and basically what that means is if the officer was exonerated or if it was unfounded. We objected to the majority of those, and we also objected to the discipline that was imposed. Next slide, please. I mentioned this already, but bringing it up that it was really important in our role of providing oversight, particularly of an unprecedented event, particularly of an event that caused a lot of community outrage and community questions. We really felt like it was important that we document our concerns early on about what we were seeing with the protest complaints. And this is an example, this is posted on our website. It's been public since August 12th about the concerns that we had we identified about 7 cases in this memo that we had some serious concerns with. Next slide, please. So I just want to go over with you briefly some of the objections and concerns that we had. So for example, it is not uncommon for a complainant not to be able to identify the officer that may have been involved in the conduct. And so when the complainant did not identify the subject officer, those complaints were closed. If the complainant, for example, We found a recurring theme throughout the investigation of categorizing the protests as riotous acts, riotous behavior. So let me just give you an example. And again, this is just an example. If, for example, a protester was seen throwing a water bottle, then it was determined by the department, because that complainant engaged in some form of quote unquote riotous act, that absolved them from investigating any sort of potential misconduct on the officer. And those particular cases were closed. During this time, again, this was unprecedented for all of us, including the police department, they created a separate team that reviewed, I want to say, all of the body cam video from the protests that happened over the summer. If that team reviewed it and did not see any sort of policy violation, then that case was closed, and we disagreed with that because that review does not replace a full investigation. It's a different type of review, and it is not equivalent to an internal affairs investigation. The same is true of if internal affairs conducted what they call an initial assessment. If they conduct their initial assessment and determine that there was no policy violation, then they closed the case and determined that there was no policy violation, and we disagreed with that. And this is not unique to the protest cases. This is unique to, this occurs with any form of complaint that comes through the Office of Police Oversight. We don't believe the initial assessment conducted by Internal Affairs is equivalent to or should replace a full investigation. Next slide, please. So we have, again, this is our preliminary analysis, and I want to explain why it's preliminary, because there were protests that started obviously at the end of May that went through the summer, through the fall. I personally spent, I think, almost all my evenings through that 3-4 month period watching protests that were streamed online. I felt it was my responsibility to do so. And so we do have complaints that extended through March of this year. And so we still need to complete that analysis. And so this is why I'm focusing more so on the complaints. And most of the bigger complaints, the high profile cases, really stem from protests that occurred from May 29th through the first 2 weeks of June. And those are the ones definitely most council offices were contacted on. But we looked at, obviously cities across the country had protests, a lot of similarities in terms of police response. And so I just want to highlight a few recommendations that we will be making to the police department. One, we feel very strongly that the department should investigate all complaints, despite where they originate. We've already pointed out in the second slide the disparity between the internal and external complaints that are investigated. And we think that's really important. We've taken big strides in oversight as a city, and part of that was to increase what was investigated in terms of complaints that come from the community, not to decrease that number. Next slide, please. And this is very important as well, and this is consistent with reports that have been issued from law enforcement organizations. I specifically want to point to the the United Nations Human Rights Commission completed a report about guidance on less lethal weapons in law enforcement. And the Illinois Chiefs of Police issued a report in 2019 about crowd management. And these recommendations are consistent with what they have put in their report, specifically about ensuring that officers' names and badge numbers are visible even when they're wearing the additional tactical equipment. So you will find that particularly with the headgear, at the very least, their badge number should be listed. And this is what we noticed in the protests here, were that with the additional equipment officers wore, it covered their names and badge numbers. And we think that the department can make some inroads with ensuring that at all times that officers' names and badge numbers are visible. We also think that it is important, particularly where, in a state city, there's a state capital, there are protests that happen pretty frequently, that the department should engage in, at the very minimum, semi-annual comprehensive crowd control training for all personnel. And this is a recommendation, again, from the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Not only do they recommend ongoing training, but they also recommend ongoing training in collaboration with other law enforcement agencies. So including our EMS, including our fire department, including, I believe it's some of the protests, DPS was also present. And I think that would help in terms of having a more coordinated response. So we think that is very important moving forward to ensure that officers are, and all officers, because in particular in the protests that occurred here, we had officers from all divisions that were called, and some may or may not have had the necessary training during that time to address the crowd control and the protests that occurred during that summer. Next slide, please. So again, I do want to reference back to the 2019 report from the Illinois Association for Chiefs of Police that talk about really looking at crowd management policies and connecting them and making sure that the policies take into consideration, First Amendment constitutional rights when protesting, and that it's also looked very clearly through that lens. They also talk about, one thing that I do want to address that came from both reports was talking about the training that officers should include that officers should not fire less lethal weapons from the air elevated positions. There's a general inaccuracy that's innate in that, and that if they do fire from the air in elevated position, it increases the risk of striking someone in the head. And that obviously is problematic. The other thing that we think that is important, given the community outcry, given I think council must have heard 8 hours or more of testimony from people who participated in the protest that summer, that we think it's really important that the police department report back to community in a very public way about, what was learned, what will be done moving forward, and how crowd management and crowd control can be improved upon in terms of tactics and communication. We think that that is particularly important in this situation as it was unprecedented, and that there should be some sort of closure and reflection on how the department can improve in these situations. I think that's my last slide, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Colleagues, do you have any questions? It looks like Councilmember Kelly, then Councilmember Casar.
Thank you for that presentation. There's a lot of really good recommendations here. I'd like to ask a few questions based on those. Number one was investigate all complaints despite where they originate. I'm wondering if you could help explain to me if a complaint comes in that is somebody who heard from someone about what happened, how you might vet that so that you aren't duplicating. It sounds like you already are in the process of ensuring there's no duplication there, but if a complaint is based on hearsay, how do you find that out?
So we actually encourage bystander reports. We think it's very important that if a bystander sees something in terms of an interaction with the community.
Director Muscadin,
and the law enforcement officer, we encourage.
Director Muscadin, we're having some issues with your audio. I wonder if maybe you could mute your video for a moment and see if that works. You're sketching out on us.
Okay, 1 second, please.
Thank you.
Council member, is that better?
I believe so.
Okay. Council member Kelly's question was about vetting complaints that may come from secondhand. And what I was mentioning is that we do encourage bystander complaints in terms of when a community member may see something that may not sit well with them, and at least contact our office. I think how we do that, Councilmember Kelly, is that we conduct a preliminary review. And what we do in our communication with the public is really ask for time, date, and location And in our preliminary review, we're able to obtain what's called body cam video and any sort of DMAP video to ascertain, I don't want to say the veracity, but to see if there are any potential policy violations. When we do this, if we see that there is a potential, again, potential, because we do not conduct the investigation, a violation, we create what's called a notice of formal complaint, and we send that to Internal Affairs for investigation. If we do not see a potential policy violation, we close it out and we take it a step further. We communicate with the complainant to the extent that we can, because sometimes they're anonymous, and we explain to them why it was not a potential policy violation. And we think that's important because we think educating the public is a key part of what we do. And so I will tell you, just based on numbers, we may get about 50 complaints a month, and this is approximate, and we might submit maybe 10 to an Internal Affairs for investigation, and then maybe 2 or 3 are actually investigated. So number-wise, you know, we're not looking at many cases actually being investigated, but it shows you that our preliminary review is actually working because we're not submitting all 50 to Internal Affairs for investigation. Does that make sense?
It sure does. Thank you for
Sorry, it was a
answering
bit
that.
of a long answer.
That's okay. On recommendation number 2, you require all sworn personnel working in any capacity to have body-worn camera powered on for the entirety of their shift. I'm curious to know if the expectation is that officers will have body cams on when taking calls from family, using the bathroom, or eating.
So, council member, this is in the context of crowd control and protests because we want to capture the activity. And so this is not in the context of like regular patrol. This is really limited to protest activity that, because there were a lot of interactions that occurred that weren't captured in the protest because I believe officers were directed to only turn it on when an incident was occurring. And by that point, you know, we lost the ability to capture a lot of what transpired during the protest. So that recommendation is specifically towards protest, crowd management, crowd control in those instances.
Okay, I thank you so much for that clarification. I just have a couple more questions here. On recommendation number 4, I noticed that you said use of force, and I know that APD has a policy for response to resistance, and I'm wondering why you utilized use of force and not response to resistance in that recommendation, like just the terminology.
Yeah, so we don't agree with the term of response to resistance because it presupposes resistance from community members. We feel that use of force is a more appropriate term because it is literal, a use of force. And it's also common language in terms of, you know, a lot of our role is educating the public, and the public understands what use of force is. They don't tend to understand response to resistance. So we generally have a policy, I don't want to say a difference of opinion as it relates to verbiage of response to resistance, how it's applied as opposed to use of force.
I understand. So I know that you are really big on education, and so I'm wondering if you've had conversations with the community on why APD utilizes the terminology of response to resistance versus use of force, and how those conversations might have gone.
Yeah, I think that those conversations actually predate me. I think that happened when APD changed its policy from use of force to response to resistance. But I believe it's part of we are releasing a report that talks about our community feedback that we received from our 8 Can't Wait analysis that we issued earlier this year. And I believe part of that is in there, but I'll just tell you, most community members really understand the terms of use of force and not response to resistance. I think it's more of police lingo that's used kind of more so internally, and it's not really understandable to our greater community. But essentially, we use them, I think, in our oversight world and in the policing world synonymously. But I tend to use them because I want the community to understand what I'm talking about.
That makes sense. I just think it's a good opportunity to really bridge those things in the education portion of the community. So another recommendation you had, 7, was about comprehensive crowd control training. I think that's great, but right now I see a issue with staffing related to patrol vacancies, and we have to have staffing in order to give the officers who are working time off. Have you considered any way to provide this training given our current staffing situation at APD?
Well, I think that there's, given, the increase in budget to 442 million that APD just received, I think there's room for that. And I think there's also room to add this training as part of I know I'm calling it CLE, but it's not CLE, but the continuing education that the department provides through the academy of not only cadets, but also current officers. I think adding crowd control as part of that is something that the department should implement, because I think that we potentially may see more protests in the future, and I'd like to see the department better prepared and officers better trained to the extent that they can.
So, and I like how you mentioned the police budget, because, we did put police budget back in. We fixed it according to HB 1900, but we didn't actually add any patrol officer roles to that budget. So I still see that as something that we're going to have to work on, especially with the attrition rate. And so I'd like to have a follow-up conversation with you on how we might be able to provide that training to the officers and ensure that we still have roles backfilled so that we're not taking more officers on the street to do that training. My last question here is reporting back to the community, recommendation number 10, reporting back to the community with an explanation of how or what it can expect from APD in crowd management scenarios going forward. I'd like to really see that as a two-way discussion. I think that we should protect people protesting peacefully, but also we should have conversations on how we can make that happen in a productive manner so that we don't see things get out of control like they did. All that said, thank you so much for answering my questions. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about those recommendations, and I look forward to how they're going to be implemented in the future.
Thank you. And I'm happy I'll share with your staff that I think you might enjoy the report from the IACP, the Illinois Association of Chief of Police on crowd control. I'll send you that later today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Muscadin. Councilmember Kassar?
Director Muscadin, I think your internet started doing better partway through there. Do you want to try to come back?
Sure.
We'll let you know if it's getting choppy.
You're going to see me feeding treats to my dogs because they're whining.
Sorry, we'll let you know. But first, just getting back to the numbers, of your over 200 unduplicated community complaints, you're saying only 27 were ultimately investigated. Is that right?
Yes, and those are, yes, and specifically those cases who had a 180, which means that they had kind of like their time frame of ending was the end of November. So like kind of their statute of limitations was end of November, yes.
And what you're stating on your later slide is that you objected to the closure of those over 150 complaints without investigation.
Yes.
And then of the 27 community complaints that were investigated, there was discipline. Do you have the number of how many times there was discipline or a decision associated with those 27?
I have that number. I'm going to have to look at it pretty quickly. But I think I'm going to punt to Troy because PD, it's under their purview to issue discipline. So I want to leave that to him. But I believe the numbers through the end of December were, I believe, 11 officers were disciplined in some form, from education-based discipline to oral reprimand. I believe the majority of the officers received education-based discipline.
And I'll get to the chief here in a second, but in those cases, how many of those did you object to versus how many of those times did you agree?
I would say that we objected to the discipline of probably 90% of those cases.
You objected?
I think the only thing we may not have objected to was there was one officer that received a 10-day suspension, and I believe that may be the only one we didn't object to.
So of the 27, you're saying you objected to 26?
I don't want to use
or
the
of,
exact
or of the 11,
numbers.
you objected to
Yeah, so
10.
the 27 is of external complaints from the community that were investigated. Just because they were investigated does not necessarily mean they led to discipline. So of those that were investigated, we objected for various reasons on the vast majority of them.
And then of the 11 where there was a disciplinary decision, you objected to 10.
At least 10, yes. Yeah. Yeah. It was a very high number. I mean, we had a lot of issues throughout, at every stage of the protest review and process.
And just for folks watching or for the media reporting, the reason I ask these questions is because this is the system that we have set up where ultimately the police department and internal affairs chooses whether to investigate a complaint, does the investigations, and then the Office of Police Oversight submits their recommendations. And I think it's important for the community and for us to know when there is a disagreement here or there. But seeing this presentation, seeing disagreements in 10 of the 11 discipline cases, and as Director Muscadin said, the vast majority of the investigated cases is an issue of concern, and the only way we address those issues is if we talk about it here publicly. So, I appreciate you raising that. When you talk about, I think here you put that you all adamantly objected. In one section, I thought those were strong words here. You said you adamantly objected to the practice of disqualifying complaints by administratively closing them. That isn't the 27 cases. That is going from the 200 down to the 27. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
And so in those instances, do you know how many of those instances you had that strong objection of the 170 or so that just weren't investigated?
I don't know the exact number, but I will tell you that it's probably at least 150. I mean, because there are so many cases that were administratively closed, or what we call Class D, that, I mean, and I talked about a couple examples. If a complainant can't identify the officer, we disagree that that case should be closed. If a complainant engaged in what the department categorizes riotous behavior, and that would be throwing a water bottle, that, in our opinion, does not absolve internal affairs looking at whether or not the police officer engaged in potential police misconduct. And so we disagreed with, you know, some of the rationale that they used to close cases. And so, you know, that's a lot of what we saw in the admin close or the Class D cases, and that's the majority of the complaints. I mean, it's the majority of them. It's well more than 60% of them.
So what you're saying is that in a case where someone felt disrespected or was injured or saw an injury, but they weren't able to identify the officer and they submitted that complaint to your office, the police department could either, in your view, could either choose to try to figure out who it was or could just close the complaint. And your objection, Director Muscadin, is that you're saying that the police department chose just to close out the complaint and not try to figure it out ourselves.
Right. If the complainant didn't identify who the specific officer was, the department closed the case.
And then what you're saying is that, so there's those issues, and that's why you have a recommendation about the badge number or the name.
Right.
But also,
Right.
I'll ask this question of the chief here in a second to give him a chance, but also another recommendation could be for us to try to sort it out ourselves using our own video or information. And then the other question is, okay, you're saying if a protester allegedly threw a water bottle, for example, that we didn't investigate whether our response was proportionate and appropriate.
Right. So if that, there's a general sentiment that the whole protest, all of it was riotous behavior. And so we disagreed with that because it should be taken as a case by case basis. Again, I talk about how I watched the protests almost every single evening. And a lot of it, particularly some in front of the main, were chanting, stuff like that. And that generally was considered, just the overall protest that happened over that summer generally was considered riotous behavior. So if if a protester was doing something that would be considered, or the department categorized as riotous behavior, just using like throwing the water bottle, I mean, it could be something else, then the complaint wasn't investigated because of the actions of the complainant. And we disagreed with that because though the action of the complainant may be an issue, it does not necessarily mean that there may not be a potential policy violation on the officer that IA should not, at the very least, investigate. And so that is, you know, just a difference of perspective in terms of how we look at the protest.
Well, thank you for raising this up. So I'd like to ask the follow-ups to Chief Gay from that so that the committee can get a sense of what the disagreement is. Chief Gay, you here with us?
Yes, sir, I am.
Well, thank you for joining and participating, because this is, as I said, this is the way our system is supposed to work as we've set it up. So can you address that issue? It seems like the first and biggest issue that was described as adamant objections from OPO was the closing of over 170 of those unduplicated community complaints. Can you talk us through the police department's rationale for, first of all, if you agree that this is why they were closed, and second, the rationale for not investigating a complaint because the complainant couldn't identify the officer? And then if you could also talk about not investigating a complaint if the protester, for example, allegedly threw a water bottle.
Okay, I'll try. You may have to remind me on a couple of the follow-ups there, but one is that, just to make sure that on the 1,000 or so complaints that were made through OPO, the normal process that OPO follows of reviewing and providing a preliminary review was not done just to the sheer volume. So we did our best to work with OPO. We did create a specific task force because we did not feel that internal affairs could handle their normal workload as well as the sheer volume that was generated through the protest. So these were lieutenants and sergeants that had worked in internal affairs in the past and understood the process. So just wanted to go through that piece. All the cases that anytime we get a notice of formal investigation from the OPO is our department looks at that. We look at all the material, we pull reports, we pull videos, we do everything we can to be able to properly classify that particular complaint. The particular complaints that she is talking about are complaints that we reviewed, and after reviewing those, we were able to classify those as I believe Director Muscadin mentioned, like a Class D. That means that we reviewed the incident and we did not see any policy violations, so therefore that particular complaint was not formally investigated. Also, there is a classification that sometimes she does not see as a formal investigation of if we do see a particular policy violation and it's a minor policy violation that fits under what we call a officer final classification agreement, which means is you see the action on video, it's pretty clear the officer violated that policy, and we're able to expedite that discipline of that particular officer. So there were cases that involved the officer final classification agreement as well. In reference to the concern about whether or not a person was identified or not, I believe that our department did everything we could to identify officers involved with any complaint that was generated by the OPO. Just to give you something that was unprecedented is one, just the sheer volume of body-worn cameras that had to be reviewed. So therefore, we did not want to leave it to chance that every second of every video for the protest from when the protest started through June the 11th, which was about the core time of the protest, is every second of every body-worn camera of every officer was reviewed during that time frame. That is why we generated 21 formal investigations, and although there were other informal related complaints, conduct counseling, field notes of that nature that were also identified during those. But just to give you an idea, that there were 5,648 body-worn camera incidents that were reviewed by this task force over about a 4 to 5 month period. They were pulled off their regular duty assignment, and that was their primary assignment to do that. As with any use of force incident or any type of incident, those do not go to OPO. Those are reviewed by the chain of command. So in this particular incident, if a force incident was identified, not only the force review team, but also the chain of command would review that incident and follow the normal procedures. If they found that there was a potential policy violation, whether it be language, neglect of duty, a force incident, those were referred to internal affairs for investigation. And that is where you saw the 21 particular internals. So I can name probably right here from everything from the Howell investigation to several other investigations to where people did not know the officers that actually fired weapons or fired the less lethals. And we were able to, in some of those incidents, identify the specific officer or several officers that actually utilized less lethal. We did that with every incident where we were notified that there were a concern, whether it be a complaint or not, that we went in and reviewed those incidents to do our best to try to identify the officer.
Thank you for that. So I do recognize that we have limited time here in committee, but I do want to, but it sounds like we're hearing different things, so I really want to just clear it up. So Director Muscadin or Chief Gay, if we could keep it short. Director Muscadin, it sounded like you were saying that there wasn't an investigation if the officer couldn't be identified. Chief Gay, it sounds like you're saying that y'all did try to investigate and identify the officers. Was it a mixed bag? Is there a disagreement? Which one is it? And could y'all give us just the very brief summary? Because I thought that was one of my 3 questions, and I feel like it's taking about as long as I thought all 3 might.
So if the department is saying that complaints were not we call them disqualified because the complainant did not identify the officer, I would disagree with that statement. I would, if the department is saying when they were able to identify the officers, were some of those cases investigated? Some, right? Were, right? But I mean, when we received a finding from a determination from the department, we responded in writing what our objections were. And so we have several objections of closures for various reasons, including the fact that we objected to cases that did not move forward because the officer wasn't identified.
Okay. Chief Gay, to your to the second question about not investigating a case if a protester allegedly threw a water bottle. And I understand that we've heard that in some cases maybe it's a water bottle, in some cases the officer may not know if it's frozen or if it's a water bottle or not. I don't want to get into that. My question is, an objection from the OPO is that we should still investigate whether or not we were proportionately responding in those cases. And her contention here is that there was just no investigation, period, because of that. Can you respond to that?
If we had video evidence to be able to demonstrate what the protester was doing as well as what the officer responded, and it was clear that it was within policy, that we did not do a formal investigation for those. But there were many incidents to where an officer such as said that it was riotous behavior that we did not agree with, And several of those officers were actually part of the officers that were sustained on for violations. So I believe that that's a yes and a no, depending on the situation.
But what you're saying is, in the case where a community member you had video showing a community member throwing a water bottle, you all did not investigate those cases just based on that piece. Is that right?
We did conduct a preliminary investigation into that particular incident, and if we were able to, whether it be through the drone footage, the halo footage, the camera footage from the department body-worn camera, if we were able to put that incident together in its entirety and be able to show that the officer's force was reasonable, no, we did not investigate that particular complaint.
Director Muscadin, do you concur with that?
I concur with that, but therein lies the issue, right? Which is the review of the policy. And so, and, you know, as I'll just use the term that Councilmember Kelly talked about, the response to resistance. So, you know, I think that our fundamental disagreement was that we don't agree that it was reasonable. And we also don't agree that the act of the community member negates review of the response by the officer. And so I think that's just a fundamental disagreement, and I think that's why we're looking forward to updating PD's policies on use of force / response to resistance.
Chair, I'll yield for a second. I had one or two last follow-up questions, but I see others have their hands up.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm going to decline to ask any questions. The one that I did have, and I was actually just going to look for some clarification. I did, in fact, hear Director Muscadin say out of 202 that 27 were investigated, and I think you got the clarity that I needed there, so I'll decline to ask any other questions. It looks like Councilmember Alter has a question.
Thank you. I wanted to first ask Chief Gay if you could elaborate a little bit more on the sort of officer classification agreements and provide some information on the number of officers that were put in this expedited discipline path. That was a new information for me, and I want to understand that better.
It would probably take a long time. I can provide you our policy that outlines when officers qualify. It's an expedited way. Sometimes the internal affairs process is very lengthy, and so if it fits in a category in the matrix that is between a written reprimand and up to 3 days potentially off, and we have clear evidence to show, like a body-worn camera, that the officer did the action, and we don't really need to ask the officer if he did it because it's pretty clear. If the officer agrees to it, meaning that they agree that they violated policy, then it's expedited and they are disciplined according to our matrix policy.
And so in the case of the protests, how many of those happened? And can you give me a sense of what kind of infractions led to what kind of discipline?
I'd have to get that for you, ma'am. I don't mind getting that for you, but I don't have that today for you.
Okay, I think it would be helpful. And then we would need to understand how that relates to what Director Muscadin has laid out to those complaints, because it sounds like maybe a separate path, and I'm a little confused about how these work together. Secondly, I wanted to look forward instead of backwards. So we have a set of 10 recommendations from our OPO on steps that ought to be taken in conditions of crowd control. Of those 10, tell us what APD's response is. These sound like no-brainers for the most part for the non-sworn people that we are, I think. So what is APD's plan vis-a-vis each of these 10 to move forward with them, and what is the process for them to become policy for APD?
I don't have them up right now. Today was the first day I looked at most of those recommendations, but I will say I agree with you that most of those are things that we already have identified as areas that need to be improved upon. But we can provide a written response to those recommendations. In reference to training, we agree. Although I agree that training does take our time as well as additional funding, but I do know that the mobile field force training is something that we want all our officers to be trained upon and have refreshers upon on an annual basis. So that is something that we've already completed, and we will continue to do that. But like you said, there are multiple recommendations of equipment and training which we concur with. But we will provide written responses to all 10 of those. But
I would,
most of those are ones that we concur with.
okay, I would appreciate that. I chair the Audit and Finance Committee, and when we get something like this, the department, in this case, it's not the auditor, but the OPO, but essentially it's an audit of what audit recommendations, given the experiences. We do get written responses as to how things are going to be implemented and a timetable detailing that. So if you can provide that as follow-up for each of these recommendations, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any other questions? Looks like Councilmember Kelly.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to close with, I'm really glad that we are at the table discussing this right now. It's an important, but it feels like an incomplete conversation to me, because I, like you, expect APD to protect people who engage in peaceful protests. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that some people were not peaceful, and it's just as important in the community that they conduct themselves in a way that facilitates meaningful, nonviolent conversations. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the education that the OPO is going to do and other ways that we can help make those conversations happen in the community. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Kelly. And I wholeheartedly agree that, the time is well past due for us to engage in thoughtful, genuine conversation about all of our actions and all of our responsibilities and accountability, frankly, moving forward. So thank you, Chief Gay. Thank you, Director Muscadin, for joining us. We really appreciate your time. And so next
Chair,
up.
sorry, I had my hand up for my.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking in the wrong direction. My apologies. Councilmember Kassar?
That's okay. Sorry, I just wanted to hold my last couple of questions till the other council members were done. Chief Gay, the other issues that were raised was about the shooting of the lead pellet guns from a longer distance and from a greater height than is advisable. So can you talk briefly about that? And then also talk about, after we saw some of the impacts on the first day, why that continued on the second day?
First, I would say is that we did learn a lot in regards to our response to the protest. I think as Chief Manley and Chief Chacon and others are, is that it was an unprecedented event, and there are a lot of lessons learned. I do and can say that we do not believe that less lethals are the appropriate tool to be used in a crowd situation. So we have already made the necessary pivots to that. In regards to elevation type issues that were brought up by Director Muscadin, we concur that although we do not train or teach in reference to that, the elevated aspects, that is something that we have put into our less lethal training for the future.
Just to reference some of the commentary earlier, I agree that we want everybody in the community to be safe and to act as respectfully as possible. Also, as the city, we really have the maximum control over what it is that we do and what we choose to do. And I understand that being told basically that your job is to be the equivalent of a human shield around a building is a very challenging situation. And I myself question whether or not that's really the appropriate tactic to keeping both our officers and the public safe. But obviously, I know that an after-action report is being compiled by the police department, and I really think that that after-action report would only really be complete if you're addressing these sorts of issues that are raised today here, Chief, around why the decisions were made around those less lethals, how it was that those were used at those elevations and distances, and to take a real reflective look, self-reflective look about why we wound up with so many complaints. In my view, this conversation is really important for us to have, but just the numbers of the OPO disagreeing with over 150, in her words, of the about 170 cases that weren't fully investigated and disagreeing with 10 of the 11 discipline decisions, that's just too many. That means that we're off. That means that either oversight is being ignored, or that those expectations and protocol we have too wide of a gap, and that gap needs to be closed. Because what we would anticipate is 1 or 2 or 3 objections, but over 150 of the 170 or over 10 of the 11, in my view, is too many. So coming out of this, I do think coming up with a strong after-action report is important. I think letting the council know of the 10 recommendations brought forward by OPO, how many APD could do, would be an important step. The council can also implement the proposition that was recently passed by the voters to give additional authority and independence to OPO so that there may be fewer instances of some of those recommendations or like that letter not being implemented. We also have had conversations as a council about having our police officers and internal affairs do police work. Given some of the conversations about needing more police officers supervising police work or doing police work, we could put them to that work and have civilians do this investigative work. And I think also we could look at our police union contract to see which changes might be appropriate so that we aren't, for example, rushing to complete these investigations in 180 days if the department doesn't have the resources or time to address each of those issues. So I think that there is important work to come out of this, and I appreciate the committee taking this item up. Thank you, Chair, and to everyone, because this was a really traumatic event for many people, both working at the city and in the community. And it's important for us to learn from it and do right by people and not just move past it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Okay, so item number 2 on our agenda. Forgive me, you'd think I'd be ready. We're gonna get I'm sorry, that was item number 2.